Omnivore's Dilemma, pages 24 through 29. Corn began as a wild grass called testostan. Testostan means mother of corn in the Native American language, Nahuatl. Testostan still grows wild in some places in Central America, but if you saw it, you might not recognize it as the mother of corn. Testostan ears are no bigger than your thumb. They are not covered in thick husks. The kernels are very tiny seeds, yet long before Columbus arrived, that wild grass had managed to evolve into maize and spread across North America. Corn spread because it could adapt to the needs of human beings. Of course, it needed human help. Humans selected bigger ears with fatter kernels and planted those seeds. By the year 700, Indians as far away as New England and Canada farmed maize. Corn had begun its march to world domination, but it still had a long way to go. After Columbus, the Native Americans were conquered by the Europeans, but maize, or corn, had no loyalties to the Maya or other people who had helped it spread. It was only concerned with its own survival. The Europeans presented a way for corn to spread even farther. The plant quickly adapted to new humans and their needs. The first thing corn did was push aside the European crops and new settlers brought with them. The European plants just couldn't compete. For example, wheat brought from Europe did not do as well as the native maize. A seed of wheat might, with luck, yield 200 new grains of wheat. A single planted corn could yield 150 to 300 fat kernels. Corn won that contest easily. Corn continued quickly to win over the new settlers by being very useful. It could supply them with a ready-to-eat vegetable, a storable grain, a source of fiber, an animal feed, and heating fuel. Corn could be eaten fresh off the cob or dried on the stalk, stored over the winter, and ground into flour. Corn could also be mashed and fermented to make beer or whiskey. No part of the big grass went to waste. The husk could be woven into rugs or twine. The leaves and stalks made good feed for livestock. The shelled cob could even be stacked by the outhouse and used as a rough substitute for toilet paper. In the competition for king of crops, corn left the European plants in the dust. Settlers who stuck to the old world crops often perished. The colonists who recognized corn's usefulness did well. And of course, one thing the successful farmers did was plant more corn, helping maize to build its kingdom. Corn helped the colonists, and the colonists helped corn. Corn made itself useful in other important ways. It turned out that corn was an excellent way to store and trade wealth. Dried corn is easy to transport and almost indestructible. The farmer can take any surplus to market and sell or trade it. In the new colonies, corn often took the place of money. Corn allowed farming settlements to become trading settlements. Corn made the slave trade possible. Traders in Africa paid for slaves with corn and then fed slaves corn when they were brought here. Corn was the perfect plant for the growing economy of the colonies, and just as important, the new colonies gave corn a way to get the rest of the world. M. Pollen, food detective. Once I realized how much of our food is made from corn, I began to look at supermarkets differently. Instead of a giant variety of food, I saw corn hiding in every aisle. Now, I have nothing against corn. There's nothing more delicious than a roasted ear of fresh sweet corn. But I didn't understand why there had been corn in everything we eat. Who decided that corn would be our main food? How did that happen? Where did all of this corn come from? And how did it take over the supermarket? So I decided to find out. And like any good detective, I realized I had to start at the very beginning, which in this case meant a field of corn in Iowa. I began with that field and tried to trace the corn as it traveled across the country, first to my supermarket and then to my stomach. I watched it being turned into meat, milk, and eggs by cows and chickens. I watched as it was torn apart and rebuilt into the different foods and products listed on all those labels. What I discovered was a vast industry, a giant agricultural business, or agribusiness. This industry doesn't look much like farming the way most people imagine it. It's more like a series of factories that turn raw materials into food products. It's a giant food chain, the one that supplies most of the food Americans eat today. A food chain in nature helps us understand who eats what or whom. But food chains that feeds most Americans is nothing but natural. The industrial food chain that supplies our supermarkets stretches thousands of miles and has dozens of different links. It's a chain that's powered by oil and gasoline and controlled by giant corporations. It's a chain that separates us from our food and keeps us from knowing what it's really we're eating. Most of all, it's a food chain built around one plant. Somehow, that small wild grass that started off in the hills of Central America has become the star of the biggest, most expensive food chain in the history of the world. But if corn is the star of this story, is it the hero or is it the bad guy? Before I could decide, I needed to get to know it better, and so I went to see where it lives in the vast cornfields of the Midwest.